Joe Elliott, United States Army, Korea, the Forgotten War. I had the great pleasure and opportunity of meeting and interviewing Joe in Monroe, Louisiana. It was 2007, May the 11th, and I was doing an interview with CBS, who did a feature story on my work back then, and I spoke at a couple of schools in the area with one of my dear World War II veterans, and I met Joe. Joe was an infantryman in Korea. He's with the 4th Platoon E Company of the 35th Regiment, 25th Infantry Division. Saw a lot of action in Korea and tells an amazing story again of the cold and the enemy they were fighting in our fight against communism, folks, and it continues today even in our own country. So don't get me off on that right now. But I want to thank Dave Penn for sponsoring another story. God bless you, Dave. Thank you for making it possible for others to hear and to learn from Joe Elliott today. And I'm just so grateful for all of you that have stepped forward to sponsor stories from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and even the Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. But Dave, I want to salute you. Thank you for your patriotism for our country and for making it possible, like I said today. Okay, folks, if you'd like to become one of my sponsors, I would love to have you. I would invite you to come forward and to step forward and to become one of the sponsors of one of the many stories I have in my archives. Again, I don't monetize my videos. I sell no commercials on this. This comes from you, the viewers and listeners. People wonder why I'm asking for sponsors. That's why. Somebody even said, why do you want to adopt a vet? Why wouldn't you want to adopt a vet? It's exactly what we're doing here as you sponsor a story. So there's information in the video description. Become one of my sponsors. You know, this goes a long ways. This is paying back, paying it forward, and it really is needed, folks. If you'd like to just donate to my work, you can do that through the comment section of the video, or you can go to my website, larrycapetto.com, and click on the sponsor a vet link. So I encourage you to do it. You'll feel good about it, and you'll be helping others to learn, blessing these veterans, honoring these veterans. An act of remembrance is an act of honor, folks. And I'm just so grateful for those that have stepped forward. So I encourage you to do so. Okay, keep this thing going. Subscribe to this channel. Share these videos. And like I said, freedom's not free, folks. Freedom's earned. We're fighting for the same freedoms today in our own country as we fought for in foreign land, you know. Okay, God bless you. Forward to talking to you. How old are you now, sir?
82.
Okay, and what year did you go to Korea?
1952.
So were you in World War II?
No, I was old enough to be in that war, but I had a farm deferment.
Okay. So how old were you when you went to Korea then?
26.
Okay. And Army, Marines?
Army, infantry.
What was your MOS?
Infantry, heavy weapons infantry.
Okay.
I was in the 4th Platoon of a rifle company.
Okay. So give me the unit and everything you're with over there, the division? Or
25th Division, 35th Regiment, Company E.
So you guys saw a lot of combat over there?
Yes, sir, it was solid combat.
Was this your first time in a combat situation then in Korea?
Oh, yes, sir.
And what do you remember about going into Korea the first time? Where did you land, or where did you end up in when you first went over there?
Well, we left Seattle just before Christmas, '52, and got into a terrible storm, and it flooded 4 compartments, and everybody thought we was going to sink. But it didn't sink, and we limped on to Camp Drake, Japan. And I think in about 24 hours, we loaded on some LSTs and went to Incheon, made the Incheon landing. Incheon is shallow, and it's maybe 3 or 4 miles out in the bay, is as close as a ship can get. And then we go over the side on rope ladders. And going over, I know 2 got thrown off because of the rough sea, and they never got them. They got pinned between the barge and the ship. And I was right in the left front corner of an LST, and there's a crack. And the cold ocean just sprayed me from head to toe with ice water. And when we got over there, it was late in the day, and we rode by a little chogi train from there to Yeongdeung-po. Wet, cold, freezing, of course. And that's where the 25th Division Rear is at. And I was there about 2 weeks. And I would have gone with the 27th Wolfhounds, where we're stationed down on Kojido Island. But I was on guard duty, and there was a prisoner come in, and I got held over as a witness at a court-martial. So that kept me from going with the 27th, and I got assigned to the 35th Regiment.
So we're fighting the Chinese over there, right?
Chinese, North Korean and Chinese. We never knew who we was fighting. They were, I don't know percentages. Yes, sir.
So you're in combat. I mean, do you ever feel like you're invincible as a young man, or that nothing can hurt you? Or what was the mood of the guys you were around? Had they seen combat before?
I don't think that was, I think it was their first tour of duty.
Do you remember the first time you were shot at?
Well, it was the third, went on 1243, that's 1,243 meters. That's the highest mountain that UN forces were on in Korea. And it was about 18 miles from the Bay of Japan. And when we were driving up there in open trucks, we could hear the incoming rounds from the ships exploding. And at that point, we knew it was war. And then I was heavy weapons, so the enemy was there was only one finger that had an approach to 1243, and it was real steep, and it went down in a valley, and the valley had about 400 enemy mass to come up the finger, and you always volunteer. They tell you to volunteer to take the 50 down with 3 people. And I cleaned it, brand new 50 caliber. And it was so cold I couldn't get it very clean with gasoline off from it. It was 24 below zero. So we went down, and the second day we were down there, the corporal who was then the squad leader had a bullet in his head right beside me, and that was the first time I'd got shot at. And then 2 days later, they massed to come up, and I was asked to get the 50 out and keep them held down. And the 50 caliber rounds were all loaded with white phosphorus, or I may be wrong, there was white phosphorus, maybe every 7th round was a white phosphorus round. And as they yelled and hollered, and we talked back and forth, hollered at each other, and my job was to hold them back, and they fired it all night long, and they didn't come up the finger. And we were in that position. He was from Kissimmee, Florida, and he fed my weapon, and all the other bunkers from there on top of the mountain had been knocked out. So we stayed out. I was out there a total of 13 days, and I got one of my Bronze Stars for holding the enemy back.
Tell me a little bit more about the Bronze Star. I mean, describe the situation and give me the details that you remember of what you did.
It was just awarded because I was able to stop the enemy from coming up and taking the mountain.
But how did you do that again?
With a 50 fire in at night, fire into them as they started up, and they never could make it past. They never got up the finger.
How many Chinese do you think you killed doing that?
I have no idea.
They came in waves?
No, there was just about 400 that would start up the finger, and they'd throw up flares and whistles and make a lot of noise. And I had to single fire the 50 because it was so cold. It was so cold it didn't get warm enough that it would rapid fire. And I had to single fire it.
What do you mean by single fire?
Eject each round by itself, I'm sorry.
Goodness. Now tell me about the cold and how that affected what you had to do.
Well, there's no water for the 13 days. Everything was frozen. And the water we got was take our helmets off and put a packet full of snow. And we had a little Bunsen burner. They're a little wafer that will burn. And put it under there, and that one helmet full of dry snow will equal 1 tablespoon of water. And that was our drinking water, bath water, shaving water. There was no other water because all the water they had brought up was frozen solid.
So, but during your time in Korea, the water was frozen, but
Not only that first, there was on the 13 days on 12 was a short time. We had so many casualties that they soon relieved. They got relieved and went to always go back into reserve for a few days and then go on to another mountain.
But how was it? Several months it was cold. Was there snow? Was there? I mean, how are you guys outfitted?
January and February and probably part of March was the coldest I remember that we were told.
Take your hands back down there.
Okay. Was 24 below. Somebody hollered that out when we unloaded off in the trucks, and I didn't have access to a thermometer. But it was probably about like, I think the 38th parallel would be like a line across center part of Indiana. So it's not the most bitter, but it was by the elevation made it extremely cold on that mountaintop.
I think it would be pretty difficult to function in that environment. I mean, especially with what you guys had to do. I mean, how did you sleep in the cold? Where did you sleep?
The little bunker was about 3 foot wide and 5 foot long, with a rock in the middle of it, humped up, and in the top of it it was about 3 foot high, and in the front of it was a 30 caliber machine gun, and we had our own carbine. And the top had a pole, so you couldn't get in by setting up. You had to slide in, and of course, it was no heat whatsoever, just your clothes.
Tell me a little bit more about the combat that you had in Korea. Was there a more difficult time, or was it all difficult, the combat? Did you lose friends?
I've got some incidences written down here that were to me were more outstanding, more dangerous and outstanding than others.
Well, what do you remember? What was maybe one of the worst battles that you're in, or?
My worst time would have been on Heartbreak Ridge. This was the third mountain, when a mortar hit the bunker and caved it in on me for several hours in the night. And I thought I was dead. And they dug me out, and really it was not hurt that bad, except it mashed my chest. And
you got a Purple Heart for that, or what, did you get wounded?
Yes, I got a Purple Heart for that.
Well, tell me more about Heartbreak Ridge. What battle was this? I've heard of that. I think there was even a movie made about that.
Heartbreak Ridge was, the spot I was in was a round spot with 2 fronts and a place in the middle that was just like a sink spot. And I being on the back side, and the riflemen were on the front side, and I was forward observer for the mortar section, and I'd have to go out in front of the MLR and to decide where the patrols were going to go, and give them protective fire with the mortars around them. If they called in for protection, I could put mortars to protect them from the enemy. And as I was doing that one day, a mortar came right by me and hit within if it just went right over edge just enough that the shrapnel went up instead of I didn't get killed. I would have if it hadn't gone. If it hit in the road or the path, I would have got killed. It went just over enough to the shrapnel went out. And at the same place, a soldier came to me and said, "I wish I could get hurt just enough to rotate." I said, "Don't ever say that." He said, "I'm tired. I'd like to rotate." And he went down in this valley, this hole, and got a mortar right straight on his head. And you know, the hard part is I had to identify everybody that got killed with their dog tags, drove in their teeth. And that's kind of hard. You go back to the aid station and have to go down in the middle of the night and identify somebody. I had an Indian boy come to me and he said, "I want to fight." I said, "You won't have a patrol for 4 days. You'll learn about the area. You have to listen and watch and keep down and learn to crawl." And he said, "But I come over here to fight." I said, "No, you don't. You'll have plenty of it. Don't exert yourself." I put him in a bunker out on the 3rd Platoon. They called in and said, "He's down in front of the MLR walking around where the mines are at, and we're all going to get hurt." So I went and, "Don't do that." Well, he still done it again and got a bullet in his back and went down to the aid station at 3 o'clock in the morning. He got up and walked around and the shrapnel severed his vein. And one of the saddest things was it was a twin. I had a twin and his brother was in the rear driving a Jeep. And a lady that supervised that in Washington decided that if you had a twin with you over there, you could be where your twin was at. So he chose to be where he could drive a Jeep instead of being on patrol, and which was nicer, but I couldn't let him go because we were short of people. So when we got 28 people come in, well, that gave us up to a figure that I could let one go. So I called him and said, "Come to CP, I'm gonna let you go where your brother's at." And he did, and went down and sat on a pile of logs. We bought our poles to build our bunkers with from the Koreans. He sat on a pile waiting for the truck to come up, and a 76 hit him in the back, killed him, and he had to go identify him, what was left.
How close did you get to the Chinese? As close as you and I are?
Yes, I captured 4 in a trench one day. Then it came in to give themselves up. I was walking, what we call walking a trench, checking all my positions. And it went around a little corner, and here was 4, the enemy, right there with their weapons. And we both were shocked. And I was able to get them to lay their weapons on the bank and take them down to Company CP, and we fed them and clothed them and sent them back to the rear. But we faced you know, you don't have conversations, but you holler back and forth. And the enemy, they would send they didn't have a solid line like we did, continuous line. They sent them out, put 2 men in a hole in the ground. They'd dig a hole, and that's where they lived for 17 days. And they had their gohung and kimchi on one side and a little satchel like a silk sock. On the other side, they had their 31 caliber burp gun round. And if they got rid of their food too fast, too soon, they wouldn't dare to come back before 17 days or they'd shoot them on the way back. And at night, we was on our right, on Heartbreak Ridge, we had the Turks from Turkey. And they were professional soldiers, extremely strong and big with enormous legs, because they had walked up and down their mountains so much that they were just very strong people. And they made very little money in their army, like $30 a month. So they'd get to go to Japan on R&R, and they'd come back with some trinkets. And they'd walk all up and down the line selling these trinkets to different GIs. And it was a nuisance. And most of them had an ear or a tongue on around their neck, to show out what it had gotten them And I had to really keep him. I had a little fellow, he'd only come in at 16 years old, so I had him in a company CP as company runner to keep him from as much danger as I could. And if they refused to buy from them, they would take their bayonet out and draw blood before they'd leave. And you could hear them digging at night, and they'd dig at night till they get to the enemy, and they'd jump on them and cut their heads off. And I could hear them scream. And
Whose heads were cut off?
We call them the gooks, the enemy. I don't know whether they're Chinese or North Koreans.
Were they a uniformed enemy? Were they well trained, do you think?
No, sir. They had poor equipment, poor, but they were really doing something they didn't want to do, and they were forced to do it by the gun, basically, yeah. And I didn't have any problem with the 4 I captured. They were actually probably hungry and wanted to give up.
Yeah.
But at that moment, I didn't know, wasn't sure what they were going to do.
Were you able to help any of the wounded at any time? The guys that were wounded, were you in a situation, or was it just the medics that did all that? Or did you ever have to help anybody that was?
Well, till the medics get there, you lay them down and get them comfortable. Mm-hmm. And in one time, I was walking the line, and one of our looked out, and we'd had a patrol the night before, and one didn't come back. One was missing. And the next afternoon, it was 2 or 3 o'clock. I looked out, and here was this man coming up the mountain naked. And I just went out and got him down his finger, and it had trip mines on it, and I didn't even think about those things. And I got him, and he was pretty bad condition, leaning, and he leaned on me, and I got him back up the mountain. And he had 26 bullet holes through him. And had his shoes, they'd stolen his clothes, not his shirt, they'd stolen his clothes and his shoes, and shot him. And he was able to get up and come in, and I saw him coming, and I went out and brought him in and laid him down. And then a lot of people gathered around. They were curious. They had never seen that shot that much. Still walked. And all the rounds they had started coming in on us. They're going to get a bunch of people. It was an entrapment, basically. But I never knew why they didn't shoot at us when I think back. And he got to the aid station. I never knew the results of that. And I learned later our medical officer was from Elkhart, Indiana, and he was my aunt's doctor, and I asked her to ask him if he was in the 35th Regiment in Korea. And she called me and said he was. So next time I went up, I went to talk to him, and my question was, did he live? Did he get back? He said he didn't live. And he recalled there was 18 bullet holes through him instead of 26, but regardless, he didn't get back. So many didn't get back to the aid stations to get help because they couldn't get them back. The roads was washed out, and we couldn't get supplies. We needed equipment like shovels and saws to build bunkers with. And I go back to the battalion and beg for them. Send us some. They never could come. And so much the roads was washed out for the food. We'd almost see rations continuously. They had about once or twice a week we'd get hot food, which was nice. And all that food was carried up the mountains by Korean KSCs. They were Koreans that didn't have a good enough record to get into the Army, so they put them in the same people had relatives on both sides of 38th parallel. Mm-hmm. And they were poorly equipped, and so, but there were so many of them, so many more than we had. That
Well, they outnumbered you, right?
outnumbered, yeah.
Were you ever overrun or anything like that?
And what?
Were you ever overrun? Did they overrun you at any time, the enemy, or
No, sir.
cause you to go back?
No, sir. We had mostly, I get mixed up on my hills, what hill I was on, but we were faced with a mountain ahead of us. It was about 2,000 yards, and that mountain had been hollowed out, mined out, all the rock in it to make a big room. It had about 4,000, estimated 4,000 troops in that thing. And the reason for that, the Air Force, well, I'll back up. They had a weapon called a 76 millimeter. It was a flat trajectory.
Your hands down there, Joe.
Oh, God. I didn't forget that. And it was knocking a lot of bunkers, killing a lot of people. And our powers that be decided it needed knocking out. And some of the officers asked me they mounted a scope on a 50. And we had to go back for a 3 or 4 or 5 day school to learn how to work on judging distance and how to fire the thing and to knock this 76 out. Well, the 4,000 were in the mountain, and in the front of it had to cut out a rock, and it rolled in and out. And they could put the 76 in it and knock out some bunkers and pull it back and shut the door. And my job while it was out was to knock it out with that 50 caliber. And they loaded it with white phosphorus rounds with a scope, which was real unusual, I'm sure. We set it up, and I hit that thing on the 3rd round, knocked it out. And the reason we knew it knocked it out, when the Air Force would come back and they'd save us some rounds from about the bombing North Korea. If we had a problem, it would drop us some napalm on to soften the enemy up. And they saw those people running over that valley, just running over that valley. And they reported it was just a mass of people that come out of the back of that mountain. And all the rock was on the backside. Of course, I never saw that. Only I saw this. I was able to knock that weapon out. And I was real popular and for about 3 or 4 days, and they got them another one and still used it. So, but it was a little different. We'd see them bringing new troops down in place, and we could see a lot more replacements are coming, and they never do call in for any to knock them out. And I've always wondered why we didn't knock them out while they was coming down the mountain instead of letting them get in place as fresh and vigorous, and then we had to fight them, day by day.
Did you lose any friends that were wounded or killed?
Oh, yes, lots of friends.
What do you remember, and were you able to help them, or were you with them when they were hurt?
Well, you don't stay with them only a few minutes. When they get back to the aid station, that's usually the last you see them. I think one of the most disappointing things was one of my sergeants had been on a lot of patrols. He had got hurt, and he come up, his name was on my duty roster, which is WCP, and he said, I'm not going on any more patrols, I'm laying my weapon down, which is the same as deserting. Fine fellow from Iowa, farm background, and I begged him for 2 or 3 hours just to go on. He was soon to rotate. He said, no, I'm not going out anymore. I'd rather go this way. And of course, hearsay is that had 10 years in Leavenworth, for deserting. And he wasn't a deserter. That wasn't his, it was his makeup. But he'd got where he probably had a problem that he couldn't live with anymore. And it's just kind of hard to see one of your friends just lay his weapon down. I'm not going back out. And I was the one responsible to send him back out because of, that was every 3 or 4 days he had a patrol. And
What was the most difficult part of your job in Korea in the war? What was the hardest thing you had to do?
The hardest work was rebuilding the bunkers. And of course the most disagreeable thing was seeing people killed. And we would get officers that didn't know what to do. The ROTC officers come over with no experience, education yes, but no experience, and we had to train them. And we were out building bunkers in reserve one time, and a new officer, a young guy, was following me, and here was a body left over from the war, and this path. I picked it up and laid it beside the path, and he fainted. And then I had to take care of him, get back for help. So it was just another incident that I guess it's a good program, but if they're not fully trained with a good basic training background, they shouldn't be sent into combat to tell somebody else what to do.
Yeah. Are your memories of Korea, are they fading or are they very vivid in your mind?
I don't worry about it, but I wake up and think about it. You know, the twin I let go back to his brother, and he never got on the truck. And if I hadn't let him go, he'd probably still be alive. But it was the rules. So it was one of the rules I thought was wrong.
What happened to the twin again? Tell me that again. He was killed.
Yes, sir. He was waiting for a truck to come to ride to where his brother was in the rear driving a Jeep, which was a lot better, easier than being combat. And I didn't blame him for wanting to go, and they changed the rules to where a brother can go where his brother's at. And I would be the one, for a month I couldn't let him go because we were so short of people. I got by sending him. And then when we got 27 people in, I immediately called up and said, you can go where your brother's at. Well, he come right on up and he went back and was sitting on the logs waiting for the truck to come. And a 76 hit him, killed him, alone down there. And it's kind of ironic. It was even back of the lines. The 76 had missed the line and went back in the rear and hit. So the medical office, medicals, and some of the others, the kitchens are back in the rear, and they can get also knocked out. And they're basically relatively safe, but not really.
Yeah.
I'm doing it again.
Yeah, but you're getting better at knowing you're doing it again, so that's good. Well, why is Korea referred to as the Forgotten War?
I think there was hardly any publicity. We had no pictures taken and no news over there. And, you know, it was never declared a war. It was a conflict. And I call it a war. And I guess we never declared war. And we weren't attacked by the North. We was over there helping the South Koreans, and we was fighting communism. And I think that if MacArthur could have gone on and pushed them all back north of the Yalu River, we probably wouldn't be over there today. We've been over there over the 50 years, you know, and I think South Korea is now a strong democracy. And industry is great, and the people are happy, and I think we've done I think the people we saved from China, North Korea, was valuable for South Korea.
Tell me again, what year you were over in Korea?
1952.
And that's what I was asking about the cold. You didn't have enough clothes? Keep you warm?
the old boots we had were these rubber boots, and there's 6 socks, 3 on each side. And then in the summer, after it got hot, we were issued new thermal boots, which were take a thin sock and it's really warm. So I was fortunate in fighting a freeze. I would change my socks every hour as they instructed. And had a medic that come around and instructed you to sit down and change your socks.
You didn't get frostbite?
I didn't get frostbitten.
Did men freeze?
A lot of them did. They didn't tend to their feet.
Did they freeze to death, anybody?
No, I don't remember any frozen people. Frostbites.
What kind of uniforms, what did the Chinese wear? What type of clothing?
They had a quilted type soft pants and clothes that were like a soft jacket that was packed with insulation and sewed. And
what kind of weapons did they shoot?
they had a 31 caliber burp gun. It's a little short gun, and it's about a 3,000 per minute cyclic rate. And they could do a lot of damage at close range. I could tell a story about that. We were picking up the remains of patrol that had got damaged terribly bad. 4 or 5 killed and 4 not killed, hurt. And the captain, lieutenant was down there, and it was the next day, and we went down to get all these weapons. And one of the officers picked up a burp gun, and the bottom part was loose from the top part. It would wiggle, and he shook it. And he said, just see, told the whole group, see how poorly their weapons are. They aren't any good. They're not as good as our weapons. They're in bad shape. And this one little private that had been in the patrol was back out helping carry the stuff in the night before, and several got killed, several did. He said, by God, they worked anyway. And I thought that was real funny and a good answer. And they were poorly made, but they'd still kill people. They were a little 31 caliber burp gun. They burp, burp, burp. I've never saw them with a good weapon. I don't know about their mortar sections or whatever. We got a lot of mortars in, and they was good with firing their mortars.
Did they attack at night? Did they blow bugles or whistles?
The first thing they did, blow bugles, yes. Put up flares and blow bugles and holler. You know, kind of a scream.
Did that intimidate you or bother you?
Well, you know, it makes you mad.
So what kind of weapon did you have?
I had a carbine, 30 caliber carbine.
Was that effective?
Short range. See, the 4th platoon, all the rifle companies have M1 rifles, and the 4th platoon has carbines. That's a little 30 caliber, lighter carbine. And the one I had was worn out, and I had a fellow that went crazy one night and kicked the front out of the bunker, and they had to take him back to the rear. And the medical officer gave me 2 big shots of morphine, and my weapon was wore out. And he just come in to us with a brand new weapon. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity. I picked up his weapon, took it with me. So I had a new weapon. I turned mine in. If he wasn't going to use it, I would.
Well, looking back on your service, Joe, in Korea, and seeing men wounded and killed, I mean, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom? Is that what you said?
Yes. We live in a free country. As a veteran and as an American citizen, what does freedom mean to you?
Well, I think that country is much better off as a free country than being under communism, socialism. And I would hope our country would remain a free country instead of under socialism or communism.
How about the American flag? What does that mean and represent to you as a veteran?
Well, I have one in my yard, and I was dismayed at a big ball game. Our girls won, a granddaughter was in a softball state championship, and when everybody said pledge allegiance to the flag after the winning of, very few of the people put their right hand over their heart, and that bothers me. They stand their hands out, and I didn't know it was that weak. Our school systems are not promoting that enough to me. A lot of adults at any function don't put their hand over their heart. Maybe it's a new way, but I still think it's not. I think the other way is what I like.
Do you think it's important that we remember about what happened in Korea?
I think it's a history. It's just like we hear about the Pilgrims coming in the Mayflower. Every fifth grader knows that story, but none of them hear about Korea. And that's what kept us all these years. My family come here in 1632, and I think they would want me to help keep it what they came here for.
I agree. What do you want people to? What should people remember about Korea?
Well, that the South Korea is a free country. They're industrious. They're big in industry and they're manufacturing, and I know they're happy people, and they were certainly tore all to pieces over there. Yeongdeung-po was the worst city I'd ever been in my life. Just people dead in the streets, and I got to go for a 2 or 3 hour pass, and mud and terrible, terrible conditions, living behind pieces of boards and tins that were just killed, and now they're a strong, prosperous country. And I didn't tell you about, we went down to Kojido Island in November to guard prisoners, and the first one we saw was Charlie. He was 12 years old, and all of his family had been killed, and he was wounded in the head, had some of his head removed. He come up to me and said, "Me, Charlie, be the first sergeant." And he just took over. He go march some men, and of course I was the first sergeant, but he had he had stayed in the same place, and he had escaped death, and our army had picked him up and got him on Kojido, and that's where he lived. He lived with the army. Of course, he was young and ambitious, and he was comical, and he came up to me and saluted. He said, "I'll be Charlie, you first sergeant." And he had his uniform on, and somebody had sent to Sears and Roebuck and bought him a cowboy outfit, cowboy boots, or GIs, you know. They all loved him, you know. But he played the soldier part, and I'd like to know where he's at in the world over there. You know, I know he's a success. Yeah. And
are you proud that you're a Korea War veteran?
Well, I'm proud I got home. Also, had a lot of the plane I was to fly home on. They pulled me and put me on a train, and that next day I got a paper, and that plane never hit the first mountain, killed everybody on it. After the war, then I had another near disaster.
Have people thanked you for your service to our country?
Oh, I think it's kind of ho-hum. Oh, well, what'd you do that for? Or is it worth it? Or waste of time, or you could have been doing something better, or whatever. But basically, I think that every 18-year-old child should have 2 years of training, half education and half military training in America. That'd be conscription, but I don't think it would, I think it would be stronger, and if people would know that, our enemies would know that, and they know how to protect themselves. And it wouldn't be, it'd be quite expensive, but they would never forget that. They always could protect their families. And they could also get 2 years of, they learn how to say yes ma'am and yes sir and clean up around their area. You don't forget that part. But I don't do it that well but myself, but it was good training.
Well, you saw a lot of combat over there, right?
150 days, 80 casualties. Some of the casualties, of course, aren't deaths, they're other things, but...
Have you ever been back to the Korea War Memorial in Washington?
No, sir.
Tell me about how long you wore your clothes.
How long you wore your clothes?
Well, I wore an OD shirt 105 days, and it had a grease spot around the collar, and I'd take my dog tag off and scrape the grease off. And I was the only one in Korea that had a white, it was left over World War II, a white trench coat. And it showed up like that light. And they threw it to me, and that's the one I wore, and it got so dirty, it wasn't white anymore. Everybody knew me by the only one that had a white coat. And it was made for the, when I had it, Russia, I guess, or somewhere.
Do you think somebody can be trained to kill somebody, or is that something that's just a reaction to a hostile situation? Because in war, I mean, looking back, you become a different person in combat? I mean,
I'm sure your attitude is different, but when you get shot at, you learn to protect yourself. You're protecting yourself and your friend over here, the whole company. Well, I certainly would be the first one to say that war is not, nobody likes war. If they do, I think there's something wrong with them. But it's like sweeping the floor or sweeping the porch. It has to be done, so somebody has to do it. Or this country's not going to be the same.
I agree with that. I really agree with that. That's good. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing that I ask all the veterans at the end of an interview, okay?
Yes, sir.
When I tell you from where you're seated, can you give me a salute into the camera from where you're seated?
Not sitting down.
You want to stand up?
You got to stand up.
Before you stand up, hold on. You got your microphone on. Hold on. I want to ask you one more question about combat. I've asked as far as change. Do you think your experience in Korea and in the military changed you, made you a better person?
Of course.
How so?
Well, it makes you more independent, not to depend on somebody else. I went over as a PFC. I had a good background, and I never wore sergeant stripes. So I went on Japan I couldn't get them. There was nothing up there to get them, so I was a first sergeant with PFC stripes on, and everybody respected the sergeants, you know. And I had to communicate with officers, high-ranking officers, and tell them what I thought and find mistakes and do it myself, do the changes. I had to dismiss a lieutenant that come to me that was not fit to be in combat. He got his degree from Ohio State University playing football, and he wouldn't take a patrol out where he was assigned to take them. And a private come and said, "We didn't go to the right place, Sergeant." And I gave him another chance. I said, I'm going to go again 3 or 4 days later. And he done the same thing. And I said, I didn't go to my company commander. I've told him, if you're not going to call battalion and report yourself, I'll call him. I called him, I told him, come and get him. That would be insurrection of duty. And that would, if they had called for mortar protection on an attack, I'd have killed my own people out there. And then I'd have been responsible. So I sent him back to the rear, and they put him in supply. So, I mean, you have to take the initiative and do what you think is right, and not be. Sometimes you have to go maybe beyond what the rules would have been probably to went with company commander, but I knew what the situation was, and what he done was terribly wrong. And I had to get him away from me before somebody got killed.
Sure. I'm going to have you stand, but let me take the microphone off you first.